Welcome to Wisdom Unlocked, The Ways of God, a production of Lion's Share, a ministry that aims to co-mission with Jesus in making disciples of all nations. We ignite and provide resources to disciple makers in the church and throughout the vocations. In our world today, there is more information available than at any time in history, but wisdom is in short supply. In this podcast, you'll hear how learning about the character and ways of God is a guide to wisdom.
Hey everyone, we're back with a new season of the podcast. This is season 6, and it marks the beginning of our 4th year. 3 years ago, we at Lion's Share launched this podcast after talking about it for a couple of years, and little did we know that our first episodes would start running in March 2020 at the beginning of the pandemic. I'm joined by Dave Buehring, the founder and president of Lion's Share. Dave, what do you remember about that time?
Yeah, that was a weird time. And I remember thinking, wow, we're launching this thing in the midst of other people, tons of other people doing similar things. And but I also remember that we knew that the things that God had put in our heart would serve people that needed to hear it. So it's amazing to me, though, that 3 years have gone by.
Yeah, it wasn't planned. You know, obviously we didn't know a pandemic was coming, but it wasn't planned in light of all that.
No.
But it did, I think, allow people to have the time to listen to it.
Yeah.
And I think that was that was fortunate. That was a real blessing for us. And we got so much feedback with those initial episodes. You know, we recorded the first ones in person here at your office.
Yeah, that's right.
And then the shutdown happened, so we started recording at our own houses.
Yep.
We had to learn to use the software. I bought the microphones from a guy on Facebook who had started a podcast with his wife like a year earlier and kind of decided it wasn't really going anywhere. You know, we made the podcast cover art.
Yeah.
We talked about different names for the podcast. Mm-hmm. I thought it'd be fun for people to hear kind of what we were working with.
Yeah.
So Heart of Wisdom was one of them. Mm-hmm. God's Ways in Grace and Truth. Thriving in a World of Chaos.
Oh, yeah.
That actually would have been decent.
Yeah.
God's Wisdom for Living. Knowledge Addition, Application Deficit. I'm pretty glad we didn't pick that one.
That was a little long.
Yeah. Surviving in a World Without Wisdom. But First, Wisdom. Truth and Grace, God's Wisdom on Living Life. Grace and Truth, God's Wisdom for Life's Issues. Breakthrough, How to Live a Life Filled with God's Wisdom. Way too long for a podcast title. Mm-hmm. And we landed on Wisdom Unlocked, The Ways of God.
Yeah, it's amazing. Those are some good brainstorms,
You still like that one? Wisdom Unlocked, The Ways of God?
I better.
We're stuck. We're stuck with it.
Yeah, no, it's great. Because I think that's our heart, is not that we are the ones unlocking wisdom, but it's just trying to make the ways of God really practical and wise for us to live. So I hope we still are unlocking some things.
Well, when I first met Dave, this idea of the ways of God, it was a term that I had not heard of. I'm starting to hear more the ways of Jesus. I'm starting to hear that out in the vernacular. And I hope that as you've been listening to this podcast, that idea of the ways of God has become more familiar to you. Mm-hmm. You'd have to go back to season 1, episode 1 to kind of hear the long fleshed out version of that. But we do try to emphasize again what we mean by the ways of God. And Dave, as I was thinking about and praying about what we should cover this season, I kept going back to something that I feel you've said over and over again through these past 5 seasons, that people need to know the character of God. And if they know and understand his character, and we, meaning the church and Christians, would have more unity, the world would also find Christianity more appealing, and we ourselves would understand God better when things come that creep up on us as it relates to doubt or skepticism. Do I have that right?
Yeah, absolutely. And God longs to be known. And I oftentimes feel like, as people who follow Jesus, because we don't know what his character is like from the scriptures, I think, unfortunately, nobody's doing this purposely, but unfortunately, we misrepresent him, what he looks like to the world. And so, I think the church is meant to be an expression, not meaning the building church, but the people church. We're supposed to be living expressions of what God looks like to people, not perfectly by a long shot, but at least they go, okay, I see what love looks like. Okay, that's what patience is like. Oh, that's what pouring into somebody is like, where they can grow up spiritually. And we don't, it's not something that is as common language-wise that I hear spiritual leaders talking about. But when you get it and you begin to see God's character, it just draws you in. You can't help but fall more in love with Jesus.
And we talked about this before, that a lot of the traps that we fall into is because we are humanizing God, meaning we are equating him to the way we respond to things or the attributes about ourselves. We kind of fill in the blank for him with us. So the way you've said it to me before is we make God little.
Yeah. Yeah. Or another way is we make God a big one of us. Mm-hmm. It's like, in other words, if you had an authority figure in your life that, whether the good things or the bad things, we assume those things upon God. It's like for a little child, I have grandkids, and so watching them as they are aging, when they're little, the impact of mom and dad and papa and nana and aunts and uncles and friends that are part of the family really does have a dramatic impact on how they view life, and particularly how they relate to people. And so if you have grown up in an environment where relationships maybe haven't been strong or close or open or whatever, we want to express there, you assume those things on God. And I've been in numerous settings where people have had to repent and say, Lord, please forgive me. I assumed that you were like this. And God actually talks about that in Scripture, that he's not like us. And we're made in his image, so there's pieces of us that we have that are expressions of him, but he's so much other, and he wants us to see that.
So I'm calling this season God, misrepresented and misunderstood. Because God can be misrepresented, like you said, by Christians in the church, capital C church.
Yep.
That's been a problem throughout history. It's not unique to our time.
Right.
And even today, where believers quote scripture or justify their actions on behalf of God. And so not only for ourselves, but the world can often misunderstand God.
Yeah.
Not just because of what they hear from Christians, but because societal norms and current thinking is often at odds with what they've heard about God, read about Christianity, or even read in the Bible themselves. And Dave, I'll admit I have struggles in both of these categories. Doubt creeps in for me and can challenge my faith, or I'm outraged on behalf of who I know God to be. So both sides of that.
Yeah, me too.
Well, each episode, we're going to talk about an attribute or two of God's character, who God says he is in the scriptures. That's what we rely on. We've deliberately chosen ones that are easily misunderstood and are wrongly used to justify things that happen or don't happen. And so today we're going to really go for it, Dave. We're going to start this season with a bang. And we're going to discuss God's anger and God's wrath. Dave, I can't remember a sermon I've heard recently about the angry God, the anger of God. Let's talk about wrath today.
Yeah.
Let's channel Jonathan Edwards, sinners in the hands of an angry God. Let's go. We want to talk about God's love and kindness. We don't want to talk about anger, and we certainly don't want to think about wrath. This is not the image we want to think of when we think about God. But we can't deny that it's all over the Bible, specifically the Old Testament. And it doesn't mean we should dismiss it because it's Old Testament. Sometimes I hear people doing that, right? We live in a time of grace. We don't live in the time of the Old Testament. What do we need to know about God's anger?
Well, to start, I think what you just said is really important. We have to start by realizing that if we have been in a setting where there's a lot of anger, we assume that upon God. And that is misrepresenting him or misunderstanding him. And we have to realize that the Bible does say that there are times that God is angry. And I think it's important for us to realize, what does that mean and what does that look like? And I want to just state this right up front. Whenever God is angry, it is not out of frustration, it is out of love. And I think that's really important, because my encounters with anger with human beings is usually out of frustration. They're frustrated with something, or their agenda got crossed, and then I'm the one that gets vomited on. And I think that's something that I can relate to, we can all relate to. You know, when you have a bad day dealing with your kids because something happened, like, what comes out of you? And sometimes I think we view God as just kind of sitting up there, quote unquote, and he just gets angry at us. And like, do we have this vantage point of God that he's always got this little snarl on his face, and that he's kind of actually looking for where we screw up? And so I think it's really important to start, Sonia, this conversation on anger and wrath, realizing that even God's anger and his wrath is born out of love for us. And we'll unpack that a little as we go. But I think that's an important thing. And I know for some of you listening to this, you might just be going, that just does not compute. I get that. Let us unfold some of this for you to see what I mean by that.
Yeah, I'm thinking about what you just said, and I feel like I've read the Old Testament through that frustration lens. Mm-hmm. That God is just frustrated with the Israelites. He's constantly exasperated by them. I remember reading it as a kid and going, what is wrong with these dummies? You know, he said, don't do this and do that, and they don't do it. Like, of course he's angry with them. Yeah. It's so frustrating. Yeah. You say sorry and then you do it again, right? Yeah. And so unpack that for me a little bit, because it does seem like he's frustrated.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, we have to realize that anger is not in and of itself a bad thing. So I'm going to skip ahead a bit here. In Ephesians 4, it says, be angry and do not sin. So in other words, it helps us understand that we can be angry and it doesn't have to cross the line into sin. But most of us have never seen any of that modeled. So we don't even know what that looks like. And it's one of those emotions that can be very destructive. And yet the Bible says that we can be angry. In other words, we can feel anger, we can be angry, but not cross the line of sin. So just I want to say that as we talk about God, so that we don't attach anger directly to sin. So in other words, I think I'm safe in saying that the majority of people have no idea what, if I could say it this way, healthy anger looks like. And so there's a godly or godlike, that's kind of what godly means, is kind of it's godlike. Not that we're like God in being God, but that our expressions are more like how his are. So we're godly, that there's a godly anger. And along with it being born out of love, it's like we have to realize God himself says that he is slow to anger. And literally, Sonia, in the translation, the Hebrew, it means slow to anger. Like it takes a lot to get God angry. And I think it's important for us to recognize that he does have those emotions. That's why we do. We're made in his image in that way. But just because someone's angry, it doesn't automatically equal sin.
So you're talking about sin, which also kind of brings up the idea of wrath. And, when you look at the way God has punished humans because of their disobedience, so we're talking about Adam and Eve, we're talking about the golden calf, right? If we're talking about the Israelites in the desert. I think it's easy for us, especially these days, to say, well, what's the big deal? Like, calm down, God. They made a mistake. Just forgive them and let's just continue to live in harmony here. Yeah. Or, okay, they were dumb. They made this golden calf. They're sorry. Moses apologizes on behalf of the people. And then the Lord said to Moses, I have seen this people, and behold, it is a stiff-necked people. Now, therefore, let me alone, that my wrath may burn hot against them, and I may consume them, in order that I may make a great nation of you. So that's interesting based on what you said about this not being anger that's misplaced, that wrath is the just and measured response of his holiness towards evil. Like I focused on the first part of that. Like, look at him. He's burning hot against them. He's going to consume them.
Yeah.
But that last part, in order that I may make a great nation of you, that's what you're talking about, right?
Yeah, and I think when you think about wrath, so again, we're dealing with two different words here. We're dealing with anger and we're dealing with wrath. And we have to realize this is not God going off on an emotional tirade. And the literal meaning of the word wrath, which is really important for us to get, is this. It's more the picture of a judge who has been sitting in the courtroom, has heard the complete case, and then dismisses himself and goes back to think about it deeply, and then comes back and renders a wise and just decision. That's wrath. So we've got to take the emotional piece out of it to realize God's just not like, because again, the language there, he's burning hot. So obviously there was things going on here. And for Moses, who probably has written this, to describe God like that, there's some insight he saw there in God. But I want us to understand that the wrath of God is not just God being ticked off and throwing planets around. It is more this deliberate sense of making a choice based on what we've done. So the wrath of God is God's response to sin, appropriately dealing with the sinner, and it's the Bible helping us understand that it's reaping what we've sown. But his wrath is always just. It's not just emotional or because I feel that way today. I like what J.I. Packer says in his book, Knowing God. He says, God's wrath in the Bible is never the capricious, self-indulgent, irritable, morally ignoble thing that human anger so often is. It is instead a right and necessary reaction to objective moral evil. And see, that's that picture of that self-controlled judge who's trying to be just with what he's heard.
The way that I have reconciled it in my mind, Dave, is, holiness is so important to God. And it's something that we still, I think, have a hard time grasping. Mm-hmm. When I look at verses about the wrath of God, I think about Romans 2. So because of your hard and impenitent heart, you are storing up wrath for yourself on the day of wrath when God's righteous judgment will be revealed. So the day of wrath will be the day when God will recompense or, pay back every evil and bring to judgment every sin. Isn't that what I want when I see and hear stories about sex trafficking?
Yes.
And people in slavery and just the most awful things you can think of. Yeah, I want wrath on those. Like I want God's justice and wrath on those people because I see how unholy and sinful those things are.
Yeah.
So there's no question in my mind that I want those people when Judgment Day comes. I'd like it if it just happened now. Okay. So, there's Sonia playing God, wanting the timing.
Yep.
But that same feeling of outrage and I would call it righteous anger on behalf of these people, that's the closest that I think I can come to understanding wrath.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like making it really simple. It's as sinners, which is me, which is you, which is all of us, we will be dealt with either by accepting the forgiveness of Jesus and spending eternity in heaven, or the wrath of God of eternity spent away from him. It really comes, there's really not a third option in the Bible. And we do have to understand, that God's wrath is to be feared because all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. God's wrath is to be feared because we are justly condemned sinners apart from Christ. God's wrath is to be feared because he's powerful enough to actually do what he said he's going to do. See, and it's these kinds of things. So there is like if we go into being children and we see our parents having to make a wrathful decision, using the definition here of a just judge who's wisely thought it through and said, well, actually, you can't go do that now because you have disobeyed the things that we've asked you to do repeatedly. So, boom. See, they're demonstrating wrath, but they're not throwing things at their kids, but they're being just. They're being wise, trying to have their children learn that there are consequences to your actions.
Dave, that doesn't sound like me when I'm throwing down punishments.
Probably not most of us,
children.
Right?
I'm like, what? You did that? You totally disobeyed me? I'm taking away your phone for X number of days.
Exactly.
Like the punishment and the anger comes like immediately, out of a place of emotion. And so that is not God's way. That is not the ways of God. Bad mom. Okay. So here's something I did to try and understand the way people think about an angry God or God's anger. So I Googled, I literally typed in God and anger, angry God, and to see what comes up.
Yeah.
And here's the most common stuff. Is God mad at me? Is God angry with me? Why is God so angry at me?
Wow. So it's all personalized.
It's all personal.
Yeah.
It's all personal. And again, it makes me think back about going back to that human context, right? It's like asking, why is my dad mad at me? Why is my mom mad at me? And I think this is all coming from a place of, I feel like something bad is happening. I feel like I'm being punished. So the answer is probably that God is angry with me.
Yeah.
Have people asked you this question in some sort of context like that? When you put your pastoral hat on, why things aren't working out the way that I think they should? Is God angry at me? Is there, a Christian way of saying it is, what have I done wrong? Is there sin in my life? Yeah.
I was actually sitting at a table last night with a man at a gathering, and this poor man from a vaccination shot he got had literally since that moment has had ringing in his ears. It's now on to a year and a half, and it is intense. And the way he described it to me is, that screeching sound in a microphone, plus that low sound that you hear when you're sitting on an airplane combined constantly. And his question that he asked me when we were together about 6 months ago. So last night we happened to sit at the same table, so I caught up with him, and it was like, what have I done that God has thrown this on me? And that's where I was able to look at him and said, this has nothing to do with anything you've done. This is the human condition. And whether it's something of a vaccination you got that didn't fit with your chemistry, whether this is, whatever. And we listed, but I said, this is not how God views you. He doesn't view you in this way where he's just going to, punish you. And by the way, what did you do that you even think you earned this, And I think, Sonia, this is where it's important. You and I were chatting about this a little earlier. It's important for us to realize that like there's a portion in Exodus 4 where it says the anger of the Lord was kindled against Moses. And the thing I want us to understand is God is not angry at us as much as he is angry for us. And here's how I'd illustrate that. If I know that we have a day at the zoo planned with my two children as they were growing up, and we said on a Saturday morning, hey, we're going to go to the zoo around 11, get your chores done and get your rooms cleaned up, and we're good to go. And I come in at 10:45 and nothing has been done. Nothing. They would hear me say something like this, like my son's name is Ryan. They might hear me say, oh, Ryan, buddy, remember I told you that we had to get these things done and then we could go to the zoo. So, dude, if you're not done in 15 minutes, we don't get to go. And I'm saying it to him, not bringing the hammer. I'm saying it because I'm for him. I want him to go to the zoo. I don't want him to miss out. And so think about this with Moses. God saying, Moses, because Moses got a little focused on himself when God called him, is no, I can't speak so good and I can't do this. And that's part of when we see this response of God. Think of what Moses would have missed out on. The deliverance out of Egypt, the feeding of people for for years from heaven, the parting of the Red Sea, all, the encounters he had with God, receiving the 10 Commandments. All of these things Moses would have missed out on. So God's heart in his anger was not angry at Moses, and I'm just ticked at you. It's for Moses, because I don't want you to miss out on the things I have for you. And I think if we can look at it that way, Sonia, it just gives us a whole different perspective and convicts us as parents, as leaders. Like, how are we looking at people that way, or looking at our kids that way? Or is it just purely frustration that we unload?
I think, too, we get caught in a little bit of a transactional mindset, which we even look at with salvation, right? Let's pile up the good works.
Yeah.
So here's a question that I've gotten, Dave. I've done everything right. I've done all the things that I'm supposed to do. I've tithed to the church. I'm a good attender. I try to do more good things than bad. I haven't murdered anybody, right? I've done all the things I'm supposed to do, and yet I can't find a job, or I don't have a spouse, or this terrible rift has happened with someone in my family. I feel alone. Like, I don't deserve these things. I'm angry with God, and I think God is angry with me because these good things that are supposed to happen are not happening.
Yeah.
So there's kind of an anger piece going back and forth. What do you say to those people?
Yeah, I think this goes back to, again, none of us do it purposely, but we assume human reactions upon God. And I think that's a huge thing, and that's where we have to realize that, okay, like, God is not that way. He's not like, okay, because you did this, then boom, I'm going to do this. Now, will God at times bring things into our life to help us see things, make a shift? Of course he does. But it's the motive that we subscribe to God is he's just ticked at me, and so therefore ticked equals punishment. And I think what we have to realize is even when God is angry at us, it is born out of love, which means this. Let me translate that to, it is born out of trying to choose your highest good. And we all know in the disciplining of our children that sometimes when we just say, hey, that's not a good idea. Hey, that's not a good idea. Hey, that's not a good idea. And they go ahead and do it, that the only way that the tide shifts inside of them is there has to be discipline that comes. And the Bible actually tells us in Hebrews, the book of Hebrews, God disciplines those he loves. And so we have to be able to, again, come back to this and realize the motive inside God is not just ticked at you and punishment. It is out of love he may be needing to discipline us. Out of love, he may be able to, he's trying to rescue us from ourselves. And I think a lot of it, Sonia, is we just subscribe to God things that are human reactions when we have to go back to what does the scriptures teach us about this. And it is that his anger is born out of love for us.
So I want to close with the other thing that comes up a lot, which is, what's the difference between anger and righteous anger? And how frequent is the latter? Because a lot of times when we're angry, we will say, well, I'm righteously angry in this situation, right? I'm table flipping Jesus right now, right? Like here's my verse to justify, why I'm angry. And so I am righteously angry, Dave.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about our response and how do we know when it's not righteous anger? It's just anger.
Yeah. Yeah. So some of that we have to, again, kind of go back to the scriptures and recognize that God is only angry righteously. And so I like the question because I think it's an important distinction for us to make. So when I get angry, so I'm just speaking about myself now, when I get angry, I have to ask myself this question: is this the same kind of thing that would get God angry? Or is this just Dave anger? And, most of the time I would say it's Dave anger. And God's anger is always going to be based on righteous things. And so, for example, when I go to Nepal and I am involved in some human trafficking things there where we're seeing people rescued out of that. And I took a team with me, and I mean, we were all in tears because there was this thing of seeing the redemptive side, but also hearing their stories. In this case, it was a group of men, and we were all like angry inside, like, where is this guy that did this to you? I want to just take him out. I mean, it's that kind of, and we were realizing we would never go do that, but the feelings were there. And I think we all had a glimpse of realizing there's actually a healthy piece of anger in all of us when it is things that make God righteously angry, like the abuse of children like that it should cause us to be angry, not again throwing mailboxes down on the ground and breaking glass. It's not that, but it's an anger inside that should cause you to say, Jesus, I'm stirred up here, and I believe it's based on a right thing. Would you show me how to walk this? Would you show me, is there any steps of obedience you would have me take? Would you show me, is there anything where I need to go to others to help me navigate this? But unrighteous anger always is going to be wounding to people. It's always going to, end up where you're having to go back and apologize, right, and make things right. Where righteous anger should lead towards seeking God for a solution.
So I think about that passage in James. Know this, my beloved brothers, let every person be quick to hear, slow to speak, slow to anger. Right there, that slow to anger piece is my tip-off when I'm not walking in righteous anger, when it's just triggering human anger, anger out of frustration, like you were saying. For the anger of man does not produce the righteousness of God. Therefore, put away all filthiness and rampant wickedness and receive with meekness the implanted word, which is able to save your souls. And in Ephesians, it says, give no opportunity to the devil. Wow.
Yeah.
That is for some of us, that is a stronghold. That is a foothold for sin to now dominate what's going on in your heart and mind. And so I wanted to say that as well, for me, from a practical place, if it is quick anger, if it is not even thought about and it hasn't burned there for a while, that's probably not.
It's my own flesh.
Yeah, it's probably not coming from a righteousness of God place.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah.
Well, you can learn more about the character of God by watching Dave's devotionals for free on the Lion's Share Leadership Group app. And this, I think you did, I can't remember if you did 3 or 4 devotionals just on anger. You can download that app from the App Store and click on that month's devotionals. And it's just 2 minutes a day reflecting on 101 attributes of God over the course of a year. And we're just getting started. We started with a tough one, anger and the wrath of God. I hope this has been enlightening, maybe even convicting and challenging for you. And I haven't asked this in a while, but would you rate and review us on Apple Podcasts? That way more people can find us. And the way you do this is on your phone. Scroll down past all of the recent episodes until you see ratings and reviews. And you can give us lots of stars and click on write a review. And I'm saying this because the last one anyone wrote was a year ago. So we need some fresh love, Dave, right?
Yes, I agree.
All right. Affirm us, please. We're asking for it as we get this season going. Well, thanks, Dave. I think this is a great way to kick off the season, and we'll surprise you all with what's coming next. If you have some suggestions too, we can continue this even beyond this season. You can send us an email at info@lionshare.org. See you next time.
Wisdom Unlocked: The Ways of God is a production of Lion's Share, a ministry that ignites and provides resources to disciple makers in the church and throughout the vocations. To learn more about what we do and how we can help you, please visit lionshare.org. You can also follow us on Facebook, Instagram, and Vimeo.